loud recording on. Done. Carry on.
No problem. Well, okay, because today we're going to be talking about France here. And in France, we have a lot of what we call place name wines, wines that are actually named after regions or villages, not named after the grape variety. For example, in the New World, and most relatable in India, if we're looking at the wines, say from the wines of Sula, they're going to say Sula on the label, and then it's going to say Shiraz or Chenin Blanc or Riesling. Where in the Old World, they name the wines after regions or villages. This is a particular wine from France, and it's called Sansaire. And Sansaire is a style of wine. It's a kind of wine. So what I'd like the students to do is to do a little research, find out, let's see who can come back with the answer first. What region of France is Sansaire from? And what is the grape variety? And again, when you're dealing with place name wines, for example, Champagne is another place name wine. Châteauneuf-du-Pape is another place name wine. These are very famous wines. But we don't get all the information on the label that tells us the grape varieties, etc. So that's why we have to know these things. We have to understand what is Sansaire, what is the grape variety, what is the area it's coming from, because then we can have a better idea of what to expect from those wines. So let's see who can come up with the answer and put it in the group chat. So let's start. I love France. It is just such a, number one, a beautiful country. They make amazing wines and they have amazing food. So I just can't think of any other place. This is a really nice example of what one could expect when visiting a winery in France. This is a very old castle sort of in the background. We have this very old vineyard, and the reason I can tell it's an old vineyard is because it has these very old walls, stone walls, that are built around the vineyard. So it's sort of a nice example of the history that France is when it comes to wine and really a lot of things. So let's look at the region of France. Here is the country. And this is a map that shows the different wine growing areas, the wine regions of France. And we're going to talk about all of the main regions. And we're going to discuss a little bit about the famous wines from these particular regions. We're also going to talk about the grape varieties from these regions. Because not only is France the largest producer of wine in the world, which it is, it has some of the most famous wines in the world, but also it is home, origin, or birthplace to a number of the major grape varieties that we find throughout the world. So it's very important that we understand the history of these grape varieties and where they come from in the country of France. If we start in the north, we see up here at the very top is the region of Champagne, very famous. It is known for its sparkling wine that hopefully all of you will be popping a nice bottle of champagne when you graduate from college. It is the most northern wine region. And those of you who remember from our terroir session, it's a very cool area. So there's particular grape varieties that prefer to live in a cool climate. And in Champagne, we have Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier. If we go just below Champagne, we're going to see Chablis, which is part of Burgundy. Chablis, quite far north as well. Again, this is the grape variety here, is Chardonnay. Burgundy is here. Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, these are the grape varieties here. And then at the bottom of Burgundy, we have Beaujolais, and we're going to talk a bit more in detail on that area in a moment. If we stay north, we're going to see Alsace, which is a region that is right on the border of Germany. And just because you have a line on the map doesn't mean one side of this line is one concept, one style of wine, and then the other one is a completely different. No, you tend to see a little bit of bleed between the wines of Germany and the wines of Alsace. There's a lot of Germanic influence in the wines of Alsace, and we'll get to that when we start talking about Alsace. The Loire Valley is a very famous region. It's quite a long region. You can see it starts from the Atlantic Ocean and it moves inland almost halfway across the region of the country of France. This is home to a very famous grape variety, which we're going to get to. Hopefully someone will figure this out. And then we have Bordeaux, the king of wines, as they say in Bordeaux. Bordeaux is home to Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. It is home to some of the world's most famous and the most expensive wines produced in the world. Below Burgundy, we have the Rhone Valley. We have the northern Rhone in the top, and then it expands down into the southern Rhone, which is right below that. And below that, we have Provence, which is quite a famous region there as well, which we're going to get to. It produces some of the most popular rosés being consumed around the world today. And then we have Languedoc-Roussillon, which both of these wine regions hug the Mediterranean Sea. And again, when we talked about our terroir influences down here, it's actually in the southern part of France, so it's quite warm there. So it's nice to have these cooling breezes that are coming up from the Mediterranean Sea that really make this area a great wine producing area. Bordeaux, even though Bordeaux is on the Atlantic Ocean, it doesn't actually get a cooling effect because of the proximity to the sea, because there's actually a current that comes up from the south, quite a warm current. And that current actually acts as a more moderating effect. It actually adds a little bit more warmth in this region, which allows the grape varieties here to thrive quite well. So this is one of the few areas where you have a coastal influence, but instead of cooling the area, it's actually keeping it a little bit more warm. So those are sort of the main regions. So we're going to go through each one of these piece by piece. Let's talk a little bit about France in general as a country. It is the largest producer of wine in the world, producing some 7 to 8 billion bottles of wine, which is about 5 bottles for every person in India. At the moment, the average consumption of India is nowhere near 5 bottles. But once it gets to 5 bottles, France will have no problem being able to supply all the wine that India would need. At the moment, the consumption of wine in India is about 1 tablespoon. So we have a long ways to go, because in France, they drink about 40 to 50 bottles of wine on average per person per year. So a significant amount of wine more than we have in India. Again, largest wine producer in the world, has quite a history dating back to about 2,500 years ago. It's sort of the first hints that we have that wine was actually being produced in France. Like most of the other countries where we're finding wine about that period, it was brought in by the Romans. And again, France produces quite a variety of wine, from a very, very simple wine that we could probably buy in France for around 75 rupees, all the way up to the most famous wines of Bordeaux, the Chateau Lafite, the Chateau Margaux, these Grand Cru Bordeaux wines, which will sell more like about 75,000 rupees. So we've got 75 rupees all the way up to 75,000 rupees. That's a huge band of quality level, and that's just kind of what France does. Most of these simpler wines, these 75 rupee wines, are the wines that are consumed locally, because again, they consume a lot of wine. Lunch, they'll have wine. Dinner, they'll have wine. And as we mentioned, France is birthplace to a number of the most famous grape varieties that we have in the world, planted around the world: Cabernet, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Sauvignon Blanc, Syrah, as well as some other grapes. So it's birthplace to wines all around the world. In every country, for the most part, India, we don't quite have it yet, but in most countries, we have a classification system. This is a government-regulated classification system that allows us to better understand the quality of a wine just by looking at the classification that it gets on the label. In France, we have three different categories. We have the VDF, which is Vin de France, IGP, which is the Indication Géographique Protégée. And then we have at the top AOP, which is Appellation Origine Protégée. The VDT used to be called Vino de Table. It's now the VDF, Vin de France. And this is basically the lowest level of wine classification that we have in France. It's designated for table wines, and these are the very simple wines that are often just consumed in France by the French people. You'll find typically you'll see the grape variety on the label. You'll see Cabernet, you'll see Chardonnay, and it is not classified by region. It'll be just classified as France. So this is basically to become a VDF: grapes grown in France, wine made in France. Really, any grape variety can be used for this. So it's a very, very simple classification. IGP is now meaning Indication Géographique Protégée. Simple means that this is now coming from a particular region. And within this particular region, they have rules and regulations about how wine can be made. So we sort of refer to it as the recipe. And again, each area, each geographic area will have its own recipe. The grapes that are allowed, the way the grapes can be grown, the way the wine can be made. Yields are limited by some restrictions on the level of alcohol that the wine can have, sulfur that can be added into the wine, and what are the acceptable grape varieties for that. And again, it depends. For example, Pays d'Oc is an area in southern France that is a example of a IGP. And then the AOP, this is now very specific. It is the highest quality level classification in France. Very strict regulations as far as how the wine can be made, how the grapes can be grown, much more specific than the other categories. The grape varietal typically is not on the label. It'll be just the classification of the region. For example, Sansaire is an example of an AOP. Okay, so these are the three different classification levels. Grape varieties that we have coming from France are the most famous wines, grape varieties in France. We have, for white grapes, we have Chardonnay, Chenin Blanc, Riesling, Semillon, Sauvignon Blanc, Muscat, Pinot Blanc, and Gewürztraminer. For black grape varieties, we have Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Pinot Noir, Syrah, Gamay, Grenache, Cabernet Franc, and Pinot Meunier. And where we see these grapes, because all of these grapes really prefer different elements of terroir. They prefer either hotter climate or cooler climate. So you're not going to see these grapes growing everywhere in every region. They're going to be growing specifically where these regions are more conducive for the growing of these grapes to a quality level that we can make a quality wine. So as we discuss each of the particular famous regions in France, we're going to discuss which grape varieties grow there, because the terroir lends itself to be able to produce quality wines in these areas. So grape varieties, now we're going to talk about the main region. Again, there's quite a few regions in France, but we're just going to be paying some attention today to the most famous regions. Obviously, as we mentioned, Champagne, that fantastic sparkling wine, Loire Valley, Bordeaux, Languedoc-Roussillon, Alsace, Burgundy, the Northern Rhone and Southern Rhone, and then ending with Provence. Each one of these regions is very unique, very specific. The styles coming from these regions are all different from the other areas. Let's start first with my favorite area, Champagne. You cannot get enough of Champagne. As mentioned, very, very far north in France, so it's a very cool climate. We have two major cities in Champagne, and these are really the business centers of Champagne. This is where you're going to find all of the major houses. The Champagne houses are there. This is where they make their wine. This is where they store their wine. This is where they do the business of wine. You don't see as much like other areas where you're going to see all of the chateaus out into the countryside that you would drive out of the major cities by an hour or so to get to. In Champagne, they're right in these two main cities. So northeast of France area is known for the production of sparkling white wine that bears the name of the region. EU law and the laws of most countries around the world reserve the term Champagne exclusively for this wine. They are probably, this is probably one of the most protected names that there is in when it regards to a brand. For example, definitely you can't have another wine in the world that has the word Champagne on it. There's a couple of exceptions just because of that they've been using this term for a long time, specifically only in California. There's a couple of sparkling wines in California where they're able to still use the Champagne on the label, much to the chagrin of the French, which really hate this, but it's just the way it is. But for example, one of the first wineries in India was called Champagne in Dodge. They started making a sparkling wine there called Madame Pompadour. And actually the gentleman that started this winery, he just passed just this last week. He just passed away, which was kind of sad to see, but he was really a trailblazer. But I'm sure at some point after he'd started his company calling it Champagne in Dodge that he got a knock, knock, knock on the door, and there was these lawyers that had flown down from France and said, you know, you can't use this name. This name is legally protected, and they made him change it. So Champagne in Dodge changed its name to Chateau in Dodge. So it's very, very well protected. Another example of this is, I think it was Estee Lauder, one of the big perfume companies, one of the big companies had made a new perfume and they wanted to call it Champagne. That was the name of this thing. So they mocked up the bottles and they were going to start the advertising and everything. And then when they found out about this in the Champagne region, they sent their lawyers down to them and they said, listen, you cannot. So they actually had to change the name to something else. There was even something like there was a electronics company that was doing a series of surround sound speakers. And these speakers were sort of in the shape of a champagne glass. They were very tall and skinny, and they sort of tapered down to a little stem and then a stand on the bottom. And they called this surround sound system the Champagne series. And again, knock, knock, knock. The lawyers from Champagne came and said, no, you can't do this. They closed them down. They couldn't sell these speakers anymore. They had to change the name. So it's probably one of the most protected brands that there is out there. They spend every year they go out and they protect this term because it's people are wanting to use this term all over the world. So there's about 5 of the main wine growing areas within Champagne that produce quality grapes. We have Roubaix, which is in the south, Côte de Blanc, Côte de Sézanne, Montagne de Reims, and Val de Mar. These are the 5 main areas within that Champagne region that we grow grapes. As mentioned, the Reims and Epernay, these are the 2 major cities where the business centers. Principal grape varieties are Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier. These are the 3 main grape varieties. They account for about 99.7% of all grapes that are grown. But there are 4 other grapes that are allowed to be grown in the Champagne region. So this is another one. Let's see who can be the first student that can text the, that will get it into the chat group. What are the other 4 grape varieties that can be used in Champagne to make wine? And again, there's only 7. That's all that's allowed. So let's see who can come up with the other 4 grape varieties. Loire, this is again, very far north. Grape varieties here are Cabernet Franc, Muscat de Bellon, and Sauvignon Blanc. Sauvignon Blanc is a very famous grape here. And if, I don't know who's able to do this, but the Sansaire is actually, when we talk about a place name wine, Sansaire is actually, it's just right here on the edge of the map. That's the name of a small village, Sansaire. And that is the name of this wine. And that is in the Loire Valley. So that was the answer we were looking for. And the grape variety is Sauvignon Blanc, 100% Sauvignon Blanc. So they say there's about 2 areas in the world that grow Sauvignon Blanc to a really extreme level of quality. The Loire Valley is one of them. And there's one other country and one other area within that country that is famous for its Sauvignon Blanc. Another question for the students. Let's see who can come up with that one. What is the other country and the region within that country that is famous for producing Sauvignon Blanc? So Nantes is a area, one of the 4 regions within the Loire. It's very famous. It is known for producing Muscadet with the Melon Blanc grape. There's another wine there called Muscadet sur Lie. And when you see sur Lie, it means that this wine has been aged on its lees. Lie is lees, and lees basically is the dead yeast, residual yeast, and everything else that's left over and after fermentation. And this acts as a flavoring ingredient for wine. And you'll see lees aging in the old world and in the new world. It just adds some complexity to the wine. So Muscadet sur Lie is one of the famous wines that ages its wine on the lees for a period of time to give that additional complexity. Angers-Saumur, this is around the town of Angers and is known primarily for rosé wines made from Cabernet Franc and white wine made from the Chenin Blanc grape. Around that area, this is the 3rd largest sparkling wine growing area in France after Champagne and the Cremant d'Alsace. Alsace is, again, over on Germany. These are the, Champagne is the biggest producer of sparkling wine in France, followed by Alsace, followed by Angers-Saumur. Touraine is another area in the Loire, produces sweet and dry wines from the Chenin Blanc grape. Chenin is susceptible to noble rot, which allows us to make a sweet wine. And again, Peter will be talking about the different methods of sweet wine, and he'll get a little bit more detail on the noble rot if he's maybe done that for you already. I'm not sure if he's done that session yet. Central Vineyards, and again, this is home to Sansaire and Puy-Fumé. Puy-Fumé is actually Puy-sur-Loire is a village, and that is, again, it's another place name. So instead of saying Sansaire on the label, it's going to say Puy-Fumé. And these are the 2 famous 100% Sauvignon wines, Sauvignon Blanc wines that are produced in the Loire Valley. Okay, let's talk about Bordeaux. This is the region of Bordeaux. Again, it's in the southern west side along the coast. Bordeaux is basically around the river Gironde, which splits, it's 2 rivers that actually come together for one. And what this does is it naturally divides Bordeaux into 3 different regions. Above the river here, we have an area which we refer to as the right bank. And in the right bank, we have some subregions Pomerol, Fronsac, Saint-Emilion. These are quite famous regions. And again, these are place name wines. You'll actually see Pomerol and Saint-Emilion. And you'll have customers, for example, say, oh, I really love a Saint-Emilion. And what makes these wines unique is the grape variety used here. Again, all Bordeaux wines are typically blends. Main grape varieties in Bordeaux is Cabernet and Merlot, which are the two most planted black grape varieties in the world. There is also Cabernet Franc, Syrah, Petit Bordeaux, as well as some other grapes. And again, the wines are typically blended, but in the right bank, and especially in Pomerol and Saint-Emilion, they tend to use higher percentages of Merlot, which gives a softer, fruitier wine. On the left bank, where we have regions like Margaux, Pauillac, Saint-Julien, these wines coming from this area have a higher percentage of Cabernet Sauvignon. Again, always blended with other grapes typically, but you'll see a higher percentage of Cabernet there because Cabernet just kind of prefers the terroir of the left bank. And then in the middle, we have between these two rivers, we have an area called Entre-deux-Mers. And Entre-deux-Mers is the famous area for white wine. And again, if you see Entre-deux-Mers on the label, the wine is going to be white, and it's going to be a blend typically of Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, and sometimes a little bit of Muscadet. And basically, Entre-deux-Mers means between two seas. So between these two rivers is the area of Entre-deux-Mers. So centered around the city of Bordeaux and covering the entire area of the Gironde department, this is a huge, huge wine growing region. It's one of the largest at 120,000 hectares, the largest wine growing area in France. It's not the largest producer of wine by bottles, but it is the largest area by size. And again, ranges from everyday table wines to the most famous, the most expensive wines in the world. Almost 90% of the wine being produced in Bordeaux is red. Only about 10 or 11% is white wine, the dry white wine of Entre-deux-Mers, plus you're also finding the sweet wines of Sansaire, or sorry, Sauternes. If you see down here, there's an area called Sauternes. There's another area here called Barsac. And these are another example of place name wines. And if you see Sauternes on the label, it's going to be a sweet dessert wine. Same. Barsac on the label, it's going to be a sweet dessert wine. Bordeaux is made up by more than 8,500 producers, which means there's 8,500 wineries, chateaus, winemakers. So it's big business. There's a lot of business there, lots of different producers producing really different qualities of wine. But again, Bordeaux, without a doubt, is the most famous wine region in the world. Let's go down to Languedoc-Roussillon. And Languedoc-Roussillon is down in the very far south. We have the Mediterranean is here. It runs sort of from halfway across France all the way to the Spanish border. And this particular region, Languedoc-Roussillon, is the largest producer of wine in France. In fact, a third of all the wine that is produced in France is coming from Languedoc-Roussillon. Primarily, though, the wine is quite simple. It's quite inexpensive. It's very commercial. They make millions and millions and millions of bottles of wine at a very low price that are sold throughout France, but also around the world. Big area, 700,000 acres under vines. Biggest wine producing region. Third of the wine in France is coming from here. Large quantities of these inexpensive wines. They use a lot of Grenache and Syrah there for the red wine. But you'll also see large quantities of these famous grape varieties, Chardonnay, Cabernet, Merlot being produced in this area. Okay, Alsace, quite a small region. As you can see, it's very long, but very skinny. Very, very close to Germany. The border is right there. It's quite a cool climate. So we're going to see cool climate grape varieties. Specifically, we're going to see mostly white grape varieties there. Alsace wine, also known as Alsatian wine. Again, primarily white wine. Because of the Germanic influence, we actually start to see, this is where they actually don't do place name wines, because Germany has influenced there. So they actually use the grape variety on the label. And in Germany, you're going to find grape varieties on all the labels. They're very, very specific about their labeling, and the wines, they're very, very detailed. So we will see grape varieties on the label. Very, very famous for the dry Riesling and the very aromatic Gewürztraminer. These are two of the famous wines that are coming from this area. Again, there's a lot of influence from Germany, but one thing that you can tell, they use similar grape varieties in Germany and in Alsace, but in Germany, for example, Riesling, you'll find dry examples of the wine, but you also find sweet wine made from Riesling. But in Alsace, almost all of the wine produced there is dry wine. You would very little sweet wine. In Germany, you're going to see a lot more sweet wine on that side. Burgundy, a great area, very famous. It's becoming as famous. It's definitely having wines that are as expensive as some of the great wines of Bordeaux. But Burgundy is a much cooler area. You'll not find, and I always like to compare and contrast the differences between Bordeaux and Burgundy. Bordeaux, Cabernet, Merlot, most of the wines are blended. In Burgundy, no Cabernet Sauvignon, no Merlot whatsoever. The grape varieties here are Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, never blended. You'll see white wine, 100% Chardonnay, red wine, 100% Pinot Noir. You'll also see in the map here, again, Chablis is part of Burgundy, but the wines coming from this area, another example of a place name wine, it'll be Chablis, and Chablis are sort of known as Chablis, not Burgundy. The central part here, these are the Burgundian wines, the Burgundy wines. And then down here, even though it is in Burgundy, is a region called Beaujolais. And again, the wines from this region are always just referred to as Beaujolais, not Burgundy. Grape variety in Beaujolais is Gamay. Burgundy, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and then again, Chablis at the top is Chardonnay. We also find a little bit of Aligoté, which is another grape variety that is available in Burgundy, but primarily it's the Chardonnay and the Pinot Noir. But this is really Chardonnay at its very, very finest. Some of the highest quality Chardonnay produced in the world is coming from Burgundy. It's a different style than some of the Chardonnays that you're going to find in warmer climates, for example, because Burgundy is a little bit more of a cooler climate, but definitely very, very elegant and beautiful examples of Chardonnay being produced in Burgundy. And they can be very, very expensive as well. You find a little bit of rosé wine being produced in Burgundy. A little bit of sparkling wine is being produced there as well. And again, Chablis, all Chardonnay being produced in Chablis. Gamay dominated in Beaujolais. And Beaujolais is kind of like its own region as well, focusing primarily on the Gamay grape. Gamay is a very light, fruity, very easy drinking wine. It's not as complex and as concentrated as what you're going to find in Pinot Noir. Very, very light, easy drinking. And they actually have a very famous wine coming out of Beaujolais called Beaujolais Nouveau. And it's a huge festival every year. It's the third Thursday of November. And on the third Thursday of November, it's called, this is where they release this is really the first chance that we get to taste wine of that most recent harvest. For example, the harvest in Beaujolais happens probably late August into September. And then the grapes are picked, the wine is made, and then the wine is now sold in November, which is really very soon from when it's picked. For example, in Bordeaux, wine that is made in Bordeaux from the harvest that's happening now, we won't see that wine on the market for potentially 3 to 5 years. So it's a long time before we're actually going to be able to experience the grapes, the wine of the particular harvest of the season. Where Beaujolais Nouveau is this very famous festival that it's almost like a celebration of the harvest, not just the grape harvest, but in the fall, the celebration of all the harvest that we've had throughout the summer. So a lot of wine is being sold during that time, and it's shipped all over the world, and you'll find pretty much everywhere in the world from that third Thursday, you're going to find Beaujolais Nouveau being available in all restaurants and in all retail shops. And it sort of goes on for a couple of weeks, and then it's sort of people drink it all and then it disappears and you don't see it again. Beaujolais Nouveau is made to be drunk today, as soon as it's produced. It's not a wine that you're going to sit on and drink 1 or 2 years down the road. It's a very simple wine. It's very fruity. But they do it commercially. It's a huge success. They sell a significant amount of the harvest through the Beaujolais Nouveau. So it allows the wineries to get a lot of cash almost immediately from when they've been able to do the harvest. So commercially, it's a very important part of wine in France. Okay, the Rhone Valley. The Rhone Valley, as far as the region goes, is basically divided into 2 different parts. We have the Northern Rhone, which is at the top. And the Northern Rhone is actually the Rhone Valley in general is a very, very old region. It's one of the oldest wine growing regions in all of France. And in the Northern Rhone, you can see it's a very skinny wine growing area. And it's because it's all around the Rhone River that runs here. And as the Rhone River for thousands of years has sort of cut its way through the land, and you have all of these steep slopes on either side of the Rhone River. And it's on these slopes that they plant the grapes. In the Northern Rhone, there's only one black grape variety that is allowed, and that is Syrah. Syrah is also known as Shiraz in Australia, same grape variety, but Syrah, and this is the birthplace of Syrah. This is the first known area that we know that the Syrah was grown. And because it's on these steep slopes, everything has to be done by hand. All of the care of the grapes, the pruning of the vines, and the harvest all has to be done by hand. So it does add a significant amount of cost to produce wine in this area, but the quality of the wine that is produced in the Rhone is amazing. It's very, very high quality. Some great, great wines being produced here, but again, primarily using Syrah. But the Rhone is actually interesting because this is one of the few places where you actually find white grapes being added to the black grapes in order to make red wine. So you'll find up to 20% of the grapes that can be added to the wine can be white grapes. So for, again, black grapes, it's just the Syrah for the red wines with a mix of some of the white grapes. They make some very, very, although the Rhone is really known for its red wine, there's some phenomenal white wine that's being produced there. 3 grape varieties being planted in the Northern Rhone are Viognier. And again, Viognier is a grape that is produced in India, which makes some lovely wine. It's the birthplace of the Rhone Valley. Marsanne and Roussanne. These are the 3 white grapes that are allowed in the Northern Rhone. They can be blended to produce a white wine, or they can be done individually. The Southern Rhone, so in the Rhone Valley, it's very narrow at the top in the northern Rhone. They often refer to the Rhone as like the shape of a guitar. The neck of the guitar, very narrow and long, and then it widens out as we get into the southern Rhone, and it flattens out. So instead of having these steep hills that we have in the northern Rhone, as we get into the southern Rhone, the land flattens out and spreads out, and we have a number of wine regions within the southern Rhone. Because it's flat, we can now do some mechanical pruning of the vines, mechanical harvest, so we can make wine a little bit less expensive there because of that. We have a few famous areas in southern Rhone. One of the most famous red wines from France is Châteauneuf-du-Pape, and that is coming from a particular area here. Again, another example of place name wine. Châteauneuf-du-Pape, actually, you can use 19 different grape varieties to be blended together to make this wine. 10 black grapes, 9 white grapes. Tavel, this small little area here, is actually famous for rosé wine. If you see Tavel on the label, this is going to be a rosé wine. And this is not that sort of pale, light colored pink wine that we really know for rosé. In Tavel, this rosé is actually quite deep in color. Gigondas is another famous area in the southern Rhone. So the southern Rhone is much warmer than the northern Rhone. It gets much hotter. The winters are a little more mild. The summers could be very, very hot. Again, famous for Châteauneuf-du-Pape, a blend of 19 different grape varieties. Gigondas, and again, Gigondas primarily made with Grenache, and a few other different grapes are blended in there as well. We also have a famous sweet wine, Muscat de Bombe-de-Vigny, coming from the Rhone. And we went to the Rhone Valley 2 years ago for the wine tour, and we visited Tavel, we visited Gigondas, we visited Châteauneuf-du-Pape, and we also visited Muscat de Bombe-de-Vigny to see these different styles of wine. So there's really a lot of diversity of the styles of wine that you can find within the Rhone Valley. Okay, now we're getting down to the southern part of France again. This is Provence, is right below the Rhone Valley, right along the Mediterranean Sea, and this is home to rosé wine. Lots of other wines are made there as well, but it's really most famous for its rosé wine. There's 2 main wine regions within Provence of note. There is the Côte de Provence, which is this very large area here, and Aix-en-Provence, this area here. The largest producer of wine here is the Côte de Provence. This is about 75% of the wine that's being produced in Provence is coming from this area. And of the 75, almost 90% of the wine produced there is rosé. I just can't stress how important rosé wine is in this region. And it's very popular right now. Rosé wines have become very, very trendy, very, very popular. And the focus for the consumer is really going to these wines in Provence. They do produce rosé wines all over the world, but it's these Provençal rosé wines that have become very much in fashion at the moment. So these are very, very great areas. So as you can see, France is really, really diverse. We're going from the sparkling wine in the north, Champagne, so famous, the big powerful wines of Bordeaux, the famous expensive wines of Bordeaux, the elegant Chardonnays and Pinot Noirs of Burgundy, the Germanic influenced white wines of Alsace with Riesling and Gewürztraminer, the big commercial hub of southern France, where they're producing 1/3 of the wines being made in France there. Very, very versatile country, very, very versatile styles of wines. And again, largest producer of wine in the world, and home to birthplace to some of the major grape varieties that we see planted all over the world. So this is just sort of a little taste of France, the different regions. So let's open it up for any questions. So do we have any questions yet from any of the students that we can answer?
Guys, if you have any questions, please send it to me. I have shared my number already. You can send it to me right across to by text, by WhatsApp.
And did anyone correctly note the Sansaire coming from the Loire and from Sauvignon Blanc?
No, not to me,
No.
at least. Tarikul, I'm not too sure.
Let's see. I don't know if there's anyone here who wants to, because you've got three different Goa, Pune, and Hyderabad. We're going to have wine tour again. We're doing wine tour for the third years now. We're going to be actually going to New Zealand in March. We postponed it, obviously, for obvious reasons. We're going to be doing it in March in New Zealand because in the Southern Hemisphere is harvest time. So they actually do harvest the other half of the year. So in March, they're going to be doing harvest in New Zealand. So that's why we're going to go there. But for these second-year students, we'll be going back to Europe in the fall, in September, October, and we will be going to Italy and France this time. And in Italy, we're going to be going to Piedmont, which is home of Barolo and Barbaresco. And then we're also going to be going to Burgundy. So we will be experiencing the Pinot Noirs and the Chardonnay of Burgundy. And potentially, if we have time, we might try to go to Alsace as well. So those are the 2 or 3 different regions that we're going to be doing for the wine tour. So hopefully we'll have the top student from each of the campuses there that will be able to attend.
Sounds fantastic, Kate.
Right.
Well, I have a question from a student from Pune campus. He's Ranjit Kale. He's asking, which is the most expensive wine and why it is so, and what is its specialty?
They're sort of going back and forth as far as the cost to the Grand Crus of Bordeaux, which are 5 different houses there. There's Chateau Latour, Chateau Margaux, Chateau Lafite, Chateau Mouton, and one other one escapes me. But then we're also seeing the premier crus, the Grand Crus of Burgundy. For example, Domaine Romana Conti. And Domaine Romana Conti, I think, has now eclipsed the great first gross of Bordeaux. And we're finding these wines, again, the reason why the Burgundy wines have become more expensive than the Bordeaux is Burgundy's a much smaller area. And the top Burgundy wines, there's just less of these being produced than the big producers in Bordeaux. And you're finding that these wines are, again, these are sort of at the 75,000 to 1 lakh per bottle, just being released. So different styles, because again, in Burgundy, it's 100% Pinot Noir, and in Bordeaux tend to be low blends. But these are the ones, they're very, very, again, in Bordeaux, Cabernet and Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, they love growing there. The terroir influences on these grape varieties, especially in the certain areas where they're famous, which is in Pauillac, where we're finding like Chateau Lafite, Chateau Margaux. It just produces phenomenal wines, but they're also very, very famous. So there's a certain element of fame and notoriety that lends to the price. It's like Rolls-Royce or Bentley. These are very, very famous car companies, and the cars are very, very expensive. So there's a certain amount of that's there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, save your money.
Thank you, sir.
But that's a lot of money to spend on a bottle of wine. I think you could buy a couple of Tata Nanos. You could buy a couple of cars for 1 bottle of Domaine Romana Conti. You might want to put your priorities somewhere.
Well, sir, I have one personal question. That is, would you like to talk about a bit and wines from Beaujolais, if you have time, please.
Well, as I mentioned, the wines of Beaujolais, it's all revolving around the one grape variety, Gamay. And Gamay is actually produces actually quite lovely wine, but it's very fruity and very easy drinking. I actually think that Gamay Beaujolais wines pair really, really well with Indian food across the board. They're quite light and fruity. Often they're served a little bit chilled, and I think they're really a perfect wine to have with Indian food. But they also make really quality, what we call the crus of Beaujolais. And I think there's 12 different crus. And these are all named after 12 different villages within Beaujolais. Mollevent, Saint-Amour, Bruy, Côte Bruy, and there's some other names of these. And these are actually Gamay based wines, but are made in such quality, they're actually made to age for a few years before you drink them. They actually improve quite well with age, and they can be quite complex and quite interesting versus the regular Beaujolais, which is quite a simple, easy drinking sort of wine. So there's actually some lovely wines in Beaujolais, and it's a little bit it's got a bit of a bad reputation just because of the Beaujolais Nouveau, which is this very simple mass-produced wine. But there are some really beautiful wines being produced in Beaujolais that we really don't see that much of.
Okay, Keith, I have got a question, which is, while aging, every 3 months, the barrels are changed. Why is that?
That's not always the case. Changing a wine every 3 months in a barrel that's quite a fast turnaround. Typically, it's longer than that, but they certainly do that in some places. And if we talk about putting the wine in the barrel for 3 months, barrels give an influence to the wine. For example, a brand new barrel is going to give a lot of oakiness, vanilla flavors, spiciness to the wine. So if you're using a new barrel and you're putting the wine in for 3 months, you're getting a certain amount of influence there. But if you leave the wine in there for 6 months, 9 months, a year, or in some red wines, especially in areas in Spain, in Rioja, you're going to find wine being stored in barrels for 3 years. So it really varies depending on the amount of influence that we want the oak to give to the wine. But yeah, 3 months, I don't know where they're seeing that at, but obviously there are certain areas where they do that.
He said that it might be in the Bordeaux, he's saying. Is that
3
right?
months?
In
Could
Bordeaux
be, but
region, they said.
I'd have to,
Yeah,
if I could get a little more specific information what he's referring to, then I can better understand it. But again,
okay.
Sometimes
let me just ask you the question totally. Sorry to interrupt. It's in Bordeaux, while aging, every 3 months the barrels are changed. Why it is that? That's his question.
I'd have to have a little more information there because again, changing it every 3 months. Yes, it happens. It's not that I don't know which wine he's talking about. Again, there's a lot of different wines being produced there, so I really would have to get a little more information. And then they can send it to me. Expand on the question. They can send it to my my LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Instagram. My Facebook is kind of full, so you can't get me there. But Instagram, you can send me questions. LinkedIn, you can send me questions.
Okay. Actually, he's just sent me another, just a link of that question. Like he saw a video, that's why in the Bordeaux, that's something called élevage process.
Élevage, which is what he's talking about, is they are, again, when I talked about the lees flavoring, for example, leaving the wine with the leftover yeast, dead yeast that's left over from fermentation. Élevage is when they mix it up. So it's kind of like dipping the tea bag. Instead of putting the tea bag in the hot water and just leaving it there, you dip it, you increase the extraction from the tea bag. And when they're doing that is they're actually putting a pole with a chain on it inside the barrels, and they're mixing it up, and that's causing these lees to come up and start to interact more with the wine. So it's giving flavoring. So that's maybe what he's referring to.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've got another question, most probably the last question because we are running out of the time. That what is the best way to test or how to check the texture of a wine?
How to taste the texture of a wine?
No, he said that how to test, best way to test and how to check the texture of a wine. It's both simultaneously.
The texture of the wine.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, your mouth, that's where we taste the wine. That's where we get the texture from. The mouth, you know, our tongue, our gums, our cheeks, everything there helps us to do that. And at some point, we are going to be doing some how to taste wines. Once we probably into next year, once everyone is back in classes, we'll be doing wine tastings again. We'll do that. It'll either be done this way, where we're all going to be doing it virtually, but you'll all be in one classroom. And then I'll be able to take you through the actual method of how to taste, analyze, and assess wine. So we'll save that because that's another hour session on that. So we'll wait on that one, but we will do it for you for sure. But let's wait until.
Fine, and then I have a question from one of my colleagues. He's asking if you could just talk about a few minutes on Libre Pate wine and why they are so expensive. The wines from Libre Pate.
From where, sorry?
Libre Pate. That's Librepete. Libre Pate.
Oh,
It's
Libre
producer.
Pate.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in Bordeaux. He's doing some really unique grape varietals, which are sort of these artisan. I'm not as 100% familiar with it, but I do know that he makes kind of limited amounts of this wine.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of hype about the wine. So in all aspects of business, we have supply and demand and promotion.
True.
And that reflects price. We don't always get quality and price equal. Often it's you only make so much of it. So you can have a big price because if you really market it and promote it,
yes,
you're going to be able to sell it all. So it's but again, it's sort of this old grape varieties that aren't really that produced anymore. I think these were the original, again, I'm not 100% familiar with the original grapes that were maybe grown in Bordeaux a couple hundred years ago. But I've never had it. And I think the price point there is because it's produced in small quantities, he does make a big deal of it. He's able to do this, but whether I would be spending my money on that, I don't think so. But if someone wanted to give me a bottle to drink, maybe I would.
So possibly Indian wine, Charisma, they're also following the same rules. They're producing it less. If you have heard about Charisma wines, they do not they're kind of mass producing. They don't do it. They do it in very limited. Yes. So.
Yeah. Again, and what I find in India, which I think is interesting, is every time someone comes up with a new wine, their top prestige wine, they look at the price of all other wines in India and they make it a little bit more expensive. Yeah. So it now becomes the most expensive wine in India. Okay. And then again, another company will come in and they'll so they'll raise their price so it becomes the most expensive. So that's why we're seeing these top tier wines in India with these huge price tags on it. But again, they only make like 5,000 bottles. So, you know, you take all the top 5-star hotels across India, you sell them a few bottles, all the tourists come in, they want to have it, and that's the way it is. But yeah, it's supply, demand, and marketing. In any business, that's what designates price. I wish all wines were priced based on quality, but that isn't really the case anymore.
All right, so that's all from me. If anybody would like to say, yeah.
I think we are running out of time, Tarikul. So
Yes. So that's all for today. Tomorrow we are meeting again, and we'll be learning about wines from Italy, if I'm not wrong.
Yes.
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 that's right.
Great.
Right.
Either tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow we'll do that. Definitely.
Yes.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for
Bye.
joining, all of
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye, kids.